We didn't know what we didn't know about genes and how they may have affected the metabolism.
The more you research that, the more you realize that's a bit ridiculous of what we allow in our food supply, which lends to these inflammatory cascade, full body inflammatory states.
Things change within seconds.
Welcome to Affinity PeakPerformance, empowering you to peak in health and energy to fully express what you were created to be.
Welcome to Affinity PeakPerformance, another episode. I've been graced with the presence of Dr. Jacob Basham. Dr. Basham is currently a senior research physician in pediatric medicine at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital and a basic science researcher in human immunology. His work has been funded by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the National Institutes of Health, which is impressive, and several peer-reviewed scientific publications in immunology as well. And he's chief research officer at Volunteer Botanicals plant-based biotech company, which we'll get into here in a minute, which is exciting, and harnessing the power of the plant-based medicines, which will speak to a lot of our viewers too. Also carries a BS in mathematics and chemistry. He has a wife and 2 kids. Go, man. And then also is Middle Tennessee native, so that's pretty exciting. He also earned his MD from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and his undergraduate was at MTSU, both summa cum laude and also summa cum laude from medical school as well. So super sharp guy, but beyond that, super good guy, great doc. So I'm so pleased that you've made it out for this episode. And if you'll just bring us up to speed in some of your work and some of the things that you're into currently, that'd be awesome.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate it, man. Yeah, just happy to be here. A lot we could talk about, honestly. As you mentioned, most of my basic science work has been done in immunology, primarily using human cells, but we sometimes branch into the mouse world because their immune systems are so similar to humans. My work is predominantly focused on using the immune system and trying to understand it in a way to better treat various diseases, new and innovative ways to treat diseases. Right now at Vanderbilt, my work predominantly focuses on a condition called graft versus host disease. But without getting too specific, I sort of think about myself really as an immunologist. And when I'm not in the lab, just taking care of kiddos, you know. And I try to split my time with a group that I'm working with. You mentioned that I'm the chief research officer at Volunteer Botanicals, based out of Christiana, Tennessee, just right outside of Murfreesboro.
Very good.
Great group of guys.
Very cool.
They have proprietary techniques. I sort of walked in to this company that they had already developed, and they have great techniques in making various CBD extracts into flowable powders to make them into tablets or capsules, and that had been their main source of income, revenue, up to prior to meeting me. And when I realized what they were doing, I thought, wow, guys, we could really do some work with this, some research. And we did a genetic expression study where we created a line of supplements, essentially exposed those in the lab setting to some cells, to some human intestinal cells, and showed that they had pretty strong effects on increasing the expression of various genes related to inflammation or anti-inflammation.
Huge category right there.
Yeah, big, right? I mean, inflammation itself is a topic we could speak for days about.
So many of the life-driven disease processes are inflammation cascade. So many of them, and well, for various reasons that we could debate or not debate, we'd probably be in agreement on most of them. But yeah, it's awesome that work is being done in that arena, plant-based, and especially local. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. There were so many areas of research I could have went into when I was in medical school. I considered neurology and, the heart and other things. But one thing that really stuck out to me in my years in medical school was how fundamentally important the immune system was to every single disease process that we talked about, head to toe. I mean, inherited genetic disorders or wound healing, things that are not necessarily genetic disorders that the immune system still plays a pivotal role in. And if you look at the counter or most prescription medications in some form or another, including plant-based medicines, there is a modulation of the immune system. And that really made it clear to me, hey, this is probably the realm where the greatest opportunity for advancement and therapeutic benefit would lie.
Yeah, that's So intelligent to pick up on that early on. And I think you're 100% right as far as the field of study, I think, is going to explode. Well, it already is, really, but I think it's going to explode in the near future here with regard to having better solutions, because it is such a far-reaching, really, pandemic issue with regard to, if we just look just at our country alone, and that gets back to what we were talking about the other day about how far down the list we rank as a country in our overall health. And as I said in the segment before, I think there's lots of components that have a blame on that, but one of which is what's allowed in the food supply that's not allowed in Europe, that we still allow in our country, which is appalling to me on many levels. The more you research that, the more you realize that's a bit ridiculous of what we allow in our food supply, which lends to these inflammatory cascade, full body inflammatory states, which lends to the disease states that are related to those inflammatory cascade rampings. So super excited that you're in that realm and you have the background of all the research and the immune function going into that. Really piqued my interest, and I thought, man, what a great thing you have to be able to share with people, viewers and otherwise. So that's cool.
Yeah, I take I won't say a much different approach to thinking about inflammation, but I will say that, in the standard medical setting, we have laboratory tests that will give you an idea of some degree of what your inflammation is. Is it acute or in the short term? Is this more of a long term, right? And there are various values that are cutoff markers, right? It's above this, so therefore there must be this. Now you are inflamed. Or it's below this, so it's not inflamed. But I think about the immune system and in general human biology, as is the case really for all biology, existing on a spectrum.
Yes.
Right? It's not binary, zeros and ones, black and white, yes or no.
Yes.
It is more like 0 to 10 and 1 to 1.5, 1.75. And what I'm getting at is that inflammation, just because you're not at this particular level, thereby inflamed, doesn't mean that a lower grade smoldering inflammation isn't taking place.
Yes.
And I do believe very firmly, based on my experience and my understanding, that among other things, many of the things that we ingest and are exposed to on a daily basis create very subtle, very smoldering inflammation.
Yes.
I think about it not like this raging fire or raging bonfire, but more like a set of coals that are just there and hanging out. And that has effects on us.
Robs energy and all that. Yeah, absolutely. Especially chronically like that. Absolutely. And I think, too, what you were speaking about a second ago, which I also believe is a lot of these parameters that are set, whether it be lab test, that you said you're not inflamed technically, but you're sub-threshold, if you will. And we say that, too, with what we allow in our exposures, whether it be chemicals or food or what we come into contact with as humans. In our country specifically, what's allowed is these, it's within parameters.
Allowable levels.
But it's multiple attacks,
That's
multiple levels, and then you do that over time, and absolutely that's going to rob your body's ability to adapt, overcome, function at its highest level. And so to your point exactly, I think it's multimodal, it's multi-angle. And even if it's sub-threshold, it's the cumulative effect over time.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, our exposures are, at least in terms of their effect on our bodies, because if you think about the body, right, as being almost like a clock with all these gears and things moving around, when you perturb one component of it, right, the others start kind of acting weird in an effort to compensate.
Yes.
And then if you throw another one in there, the overall effect is not additive. It's multiplicative. And to what degree depends on obviously the initial insult, how long it's still occurring, and then what other things are going on. And so you can turn what would intuitively be an additive problem into a multiplicative, into an exponential problem. And now all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3 exposures aren't creating 1, 2, 3 problems. They're creating 9, 10, 11 problems, 12 problems, 27 problems that you can't put your finger on. Yeah. Which one of these is it? And so you start attacking the worst one. This is a thing we do pretty regularly in modern medicine. A patient comes in, they have several complaints, and, you're allotted 20, 25 minutes to see the patient. And so you say, well, which one is the one that's really bothering you the most?
Yes.
And we'll address that now and then come back for the other ones with the hope that maybe you've addressed the first one. They've got some benefit.
Yeah.
And now you can address the other ones as they come back.
To that point, I just read a pretty cute example of that in a book. It was talking about, here's the medical doctor just for saying you have this amount of time that has been crushed down to solve all these major problems for a patient. And it's not unlike they hear in the distance, they're walking down the nature trail and they hear someone drowning out in the waters, and with thought to no regard for self, jumped in, saved the person, but it took everything they had to bring him to shore. And the minute they get him to shore, they hear 2 more people drowning. And so sure enough, they jump back in the water. They're going after it as hard as they can. They save the other 2, and now they hear 4 more people but never have enough time or resource to go, who's throwing the people in the water?
Right.
And so modern medicine's kind of hitting this wall, if you will, with all of these systemic issues and problems that are multi-cause without being able to go, well, what's the root cause of why these are issues in the first place? And like you said, when you're throwing off, and I see that with polypharmacy, right? So when someone's on, like some of my family members have been on multiple, and half of them are to treat the side effects of the other half, and which you boil it back down, it's like, okay, we can chase the symptoms forever, but let's get back to what is the root causes of these gauges being off, if you will, and all the systems of the body. And so it's good to hear that is a focus within the research and work that you're doing with regard to, at the base level, what's throwing the immune system off. And what can we do to safeguard at the lowest level, at the cellular level, really the highest level, but at the base level, what can we do to safeguard those systems and help them perform better? Because if we can do that, then it has the trickle-up effect, in the positive direction. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, excluding people who have been born with clear genetic causes that cause an immune deficiency, in general, most people have a proper, functioning, good immune system. And just like any system, you start throwing a bunch of wrenches and things into it, you start getting various outcomes. And then that's when the tiny little differences in your genetic makeup start manifesting in terms of your immune system, because maybe your symptoms look a little different. One particular exposure or diet might make this individual just have bad achy joints that are inflamed. Same exposure to a different person could just be fatigue and a headache.
Yeah.
Right.
You can even see that difference in twins just because
Absolutely.
It's like epigenetic. Yes, that's very true and cool to see for sure. What are your thoughts on, with regard to, it's good to hear you say, and I think unfortunately many have been misguided in the populace to think almost a victim mentality, like, oh, this is my lot in life, which we know is not true if we can identify what things need to be modified, whether it be diet, whether it be chemicals around you, all these different variables. What is your thought on how quickly, if someone identifies the influences that are causing a negative effect with their immune response, how quickly do you believe on a cellular level, if those things are addressed, can someone see a turnaround in their, not only in how they feel, but how they perform?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
And I would say that, obviously it's going to depend. The first thing is going to be, what is this exposure we're talking about? What kind of symptoms are we looking at?
Yeah.
But on a cellular level, things change within seconds. I can tell you from an immunology perspective, just not to get too detailed, but I love this sort of thing.
Yeah.
T cells, the adaptive part of our immune system, that part of our immune system that sees something and then builds a defense with it and makes you immune to it later in the future. When somebody says, I have immunity to that, what they may or may not realize they're saying is, my T cells have recognized that, and now they're ready for it if it comes back. We know, based on laboratory and very detailed studies, that if you expose a T cell to a stimulus, or what we would call an antigen, the response intracellularly is within seconds.
Awesome.
It happens so fast, right?
That's awesome.
And then the cells that multiply after that, they will modify the genetic expression of various immune-related genes with every single multiplication. I mean, so on the quickest level, within seconds, from a symptomatic standpoint, I mean, it's going to depend, right, on what your symptom is, if you remove the offending agent, what other interventions you bring in to address whatever the symptoms or the root cause are. But in general, I love this discussion because really what you're getting at is epigenetics. Mm-hmm. That's really what we're looking at. How do we change the expression of these various genes that are being dysregulated? And it can happen very quickly. Very quickly. I mean, some people say, anecdotally, right? I made a modification. I feel better in a few days. Others, I didn't notice much in the beginning, but a few weeks into this, I've noticed a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
I mean, I know me personally, I didn't take care of myself very well in medical school. In the first part of residency, certainly.
The stress.
Yeah. And then when I got back into, realizing I need to take care of myself, started working out more, felt horrible, right? The first 2 weeks, 3 weeks. What am I doing? I'm supposed to feel better. And then all of a sudden, it's like you get over this hump. You're providing a driving pressure to your body, right? To your heart, to your lungs, to your muscles. And eventually they realize, oh, this is the new environment. So let's alter our response to that environment.
Yes.
And after a few weeks, I was a whole different person. And now I crave it again.
Yes.
And
I've seen the magic too with those that we introduce. They're ready for and introduce exercise program. At the same time, they're modifying their diet to be cleaner. So they're detoxing. They go through that green gills few weeks, but so worth it on the other side. For some, 4 days, and they're on the other side of it and they feel better and better, and energy and mental clarity, all of it, because they're detoxing the body, not just of heavy metals, but different toxins that they've built up into the fatty tissues and whatnot. At the same time, they're demanding of it, like you said, and making the body respond to it by gaining strength and density. So what you experienced was something that I've gotten to see for 25 years, which juices me because I get to see where they're coming from and get to see where they're at and get to know where they're going,
right,
should they continue. And that gets back to what we talked about the other day, is the whole intention behind these things is how can we raise the bar collectively, one family at a time, but community and for the country, how can we raise our bar back up where we're a stronger, healthier nation, more fit, more able, more clear, not just for our own personal performance, but also the performances of our families and of our communities and then our nation. So that being the overall goal, that's why I was so pleased that that's a passion for you too. It sounded like. That's good to hear.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the immune system, talking about how we can, help one another build a better, not just foundation, but sort of inner workings for everybody. I think something to consider would be how we communicate about our health states. One thing that I hear a lot, as an example, would be somebody who tells me, I'm sick all the time. I must have it's my bad immune system. I have such a bad immune system. And I don't always have the opportunity to tell them, what that actually means is if you feel sick all the time, you've actually got a fever or you've actually got signs of inflammation, you don't have a weak immune system. You have an immune system that's activated.
Yeah.
It's working.
Overtime.
It's working overtime.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because you get sick from, say, a virus or a bacteria, in general, again, excluding people with obvious genetic disorders that cause immunodeficiencies, whenever you get exposed to these things, the body is supposed to have swollen lymph nodes. It's supposed to make you have a fever.
Yes.
That means it's working, right?
Yes.
I think the question isn't, why isn't it turning off? It's, what can you do to keep yourself from getting there?
Yeah.
Hand washing, eating healthy, all of those things. I mean, I'm a physician and immunologist, and I still get sick too. But I don't look at myself and say, I'm unhealthy because I got sick.
Yeah.
No, people can get sicker because they're unhealthy.
Yes. Yeah, it gets back to the adaptability. So the higher our level of adaptability to things that come in our personal environment, but even around us, our higher level of adaptability equals our higher level of health expression. And if we're winning the war most of the time without having those subthreshold inflammations and whatnot, job well done, immune system, because it's got a big job to do 24/7 in all directions. Same thing with the nervous system. I'm a passionate person about the nervous system and brain work. We do a lot of brain work in the clinic in Williamson County now. and Marshall County too is coming, because it governs and controls and coordinates all the other systems. But getting back to your excitement about the epigenetic understanding, and I think there is not only a ton of work going that direction, but the speed at which it's being understood is greatly amplified by the computing power that we have now, and running some of these understandings through, I hate to say the buzzword AI, but the AI is really, with the quantum computing, has been able to ramp that work up it's such a greater rate than ever before to do the crunching of the understanding. But the concepts were always there, but to be able to get the right answers so much faster, and then be much more targeted and specific with how do we go about handling something that maybe is hereditarily passed at the front end, and modifying that for a healthier outcome. It's
I'm
exciting.
really glad you said that component about the AI, right? Because it's often touted as the system came up with this idea, right? But really, it's more scientists, doctors sitting down and saying, we need to go about it this way, but there's no way in the world that we could do it the way we need to do it as us, or with these simple computer programs. And so, AI, the way it's written, brings that together and does it in such an economically efficient way that the answers you get, the most beautiful aspect about it is once you get an answer, you can look back through the trail and say, oh, this is how it arrived there.
Yes.
And that, again, providing further insight.
Yes, yes. Yeah, well, I think we have 30 trillion cells, but even in our normal gut flora, and you might correct me if this is wrong, but I think it's 39 trillion cells as well. So even more gut flora than we have human body cells. That's a whole lot of possible combinations if you think about it, especially with regard to the direct influence of that flora and our uptake of nutrients, but also our immune system's response in the GI tract being such a huge role.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
75% of your body's immune system exists right here.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
75%. If you were to take all the immune cells out in your body, weigh them, 75% of them come through. They really are our gateway to the outside world.
Yes. Yes. So a huge importance, not just in field of study, but understanding. And like you said, having the epigenetic understanding of, are you switching this gene on or off, and how can we support that or bolster that efficiencies and abilities. And the more we work in that direction, in that field specifically, look at the outcome. Not just when we are fed proper nutrition, do we absorb it, but two, are we handling things at the front end and not having to handle things upstream, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Back to your point about adaptability. I mean, there's so much redundancy in our physiology and in our immune system that the whole goal of the cells on the outside, the cells on the inside, our immune system, our nervous system, is to be able to react to our stimulus, right? We have this term in physiology, homeostasis.
Yes.
We want to achieve a certain level of activity, this in spite of whatever's being thrown at us. And how do we do that? We do it through epigenetic modulation. And so if you expose your body to an environmental toxin, so to speak, or whatever stress, you want to provide a deadline to meet or an exercise, whatever, the body will begin to shift in that direction, making it more amenable to the circumstances. And so if we live in that healthier state, the body naturally flows back to that place it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was something I was posed to as back in grad school, which was a paradigm shift at the time, a bit, not much, but a bit. They said, well, if you vomit, is that healthy or unhealthy? Well, of course, it's a healthy response. The body's trying to get something foreign or dangerous out of the body, right? Or if you run a fever, should you eat a bunch of Tylenol right away and knock the fever down? Or is that your body being healthy, trying to burn off the foreign invader, the bacteria, virus, whatever? And so that subtle paradigm shift, I think, is reemerging at a greater scale now, that they're seeing some of this old model thinking is not accurate with regard to true health expression. It's more in the model of sickness management.
That's right.
Forevermore. So
I incorporate this into my own practice. I love that you brought that up. Yeah. Just as an example, I mean, children come to the hospital very ill. If they're not dehydrated and have been eating well recently, I will not aggressively treat a fever because it's good for the body. Obviously their metabolic demand goes up when they're febrile. So if there are other things going on, and I want to decrease that metabolic demand because I need, this treatment to be the priority, sure, we'll treat it. But I like a fever, and I think that throws some people off sometimes. I'm like, parents get very worried. Should we treat the fever? They're afraid something, is going to happen.
Yeah.
A big myth is that your body can fever itself into brain damage, and this is simply not true.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You can be exposed to an exogenous source of heat, like the sun or,
Yes.
or a sauna, and then get too high. Your internal body temperature goes up and you can harm yourself.
Yeah.
But your body has a physiologic pop-off valve, essentially.
And I think that's great for parents to hear directly from an expert in immunology, because I think that's more of a product of years of maybe commercials.
Absolutely.
Of products that are wanting you to use it for everything and not the actual physiology, accuracy, or truth of it, which you're talking about. So I think that's such a valuable thing for parents to know,
as you said,
directly from you. Yeah.
Fever's been interpreted as a sort of, at least recently in the last several years, as a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right? For a long time, I think.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate enough, I think, to have mentors in medical school and early residency who had been practicing medicine for 40-something years.
Nice, yeah.
Who said, we used to not treat this because it's a good thing.
Yeah. We've seen it all by now, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, as a physician, I have, you want to be compassionate, and if the patient is at 104 temperature and they're miserable for 2 days, you want to intervene a little bit.
Sure.
But as an immunologist, I see that and think, your body's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And if I mess that up, I don't know what's down the line.
Yeah, all things within reason, for sure.
Right.
There's always other variables to be addressed, but it's good to know the delineation of that simple truth, because oftentimes it's not taught, or even talking to parents where, well, what did the docs say? It's just sometimes skipped over because it's easier and it's more time efficient to address bigger issues that also maybe they're there for too. So all things with consideration, but it's still refreshing to hear that you also identify that and agree with that as well. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
cool. Yeah. So what else would you say, looking forward, especially with some of these researches that you're going into with some of the plant-based, especially with the cannabinoid variations, do you see industry-wide a bigger trend heading towards plant-based intervention directly, or will we still see the trend where they take that information and then modify it big pharma style into man-made variations?
Yeah, I
What do you
think,
see with that?
yeah, at the end of the day, I think, in terms of big pharma, they're going to do whatever's the most efficient and profitable for them. If it means finding something in a plant, then, sure, they'll do that. But oftentimes they're looking for these big, profound effects in these studies that show, irrefutable proof of effect. But what's interesting is now we look back on all these studies and we say, well, we didn't know what we didn't know about genes and how they may have affected the metabolism or the transport or whatever of these medications. And so it's flipping a lot of things on its head. Maybe these drugs that didn't work in this setting didn't work because the study wasn't designed properly. We didn't know enough about the patients. Responders were in both groups, or non-responders were in both groups, and so the result is null. I think that, in terms of big pharma, I mentioned that, but
How about with regard to population demand towards something closer to natural source, less modified by man? Do you see a bigger trend happening that direction, or do you see the trend being similar to what it has been? I do believe, because they're such giants now and have systems in place to do what they do so well, I think those trends will still be in big pharma, like you've described. But I'm curious about what your thoughts might be of what you've researched or identified with this company or others. Do you see the trend heading more towards what the population is desiring, like when they're starting to send the message to these food makers, like, we don't want this in the food. Mm-hmm. And they're finally getting the message where they're coming out with like, okay, we took that back out.
right.
Yeah. Do you see more of that happening in the near future, or similar rate?
I see way more of it happening. I mean, in this age of information, it seems to me, in my experience, and I see this in just my medical practice too, that things are sort of like a pendulum. Oftentimes they'll swing one way and everybody wants to know everything and they're really detailed and interested in all the facts. And then oftentimes it'll swing the other way and they just want to know, what do you think?
Yeah.
You just tell me, what should we do? Right? And of course, those are all based on factors like your income level, education level, things like that, But I would say that big picture in today's age of information, people are taking more charge, it seems like, of what they're putting in their body. They want to know more about it. Even if they don't always know exactly what it is, they want that information available. And that's one of our big goals at Volunteer Botanicals, the company I work with, is being utterly transparent about everything.
I love that. That's
Here's
great.
the data we have. We can't make any, over-the-top claims or promise you anything, but here's what the science says. Go do this experiment in China or Thailand. You'll get the same results.
Mm-hmm. That's quality. Unfortunately, especially in, which we've seen, I know you've seen this too, unfortunately in the natural realm, supplement realm, if you will, because it wasn't, especially with research that has or hasn't been done enough, they'll take a little thing, we know it does this, and then they'll run with it marketing-wise. And so is it true? Yeah, but it's not really defined and or reproducible and or researched properly enough. So because of that, you get a flooding of the market with products, but half of them are junk, And so to avoid that, I think the industry has learned from that over the years too, and it's finally coming back full circle, more refined, wanting more research, wanting more transparency, because it boils back down to, there's 100 products on the market, but which ones have credible companies behind them that do the work that's proper? And I think there's a huge win in that, especially not just the near future, but in the longer future, the next 10, 20 years. And then bringing onto the scene some of these higher understandings at the genomic level, I think is going to be a huge win if you can marry those two as far as a company providing safe, closer to nature sources to remedy some of these things. So that's good to hear.
I mean, you raise an interesting point. Sort of what you were describing is a concept in biostatistics we call validity. Mm-hmm. Maybe this study showed one effect, but how valid is that to another population? This medicine may have worked in 75-year-olds with COPD and congestive heart failure, but don't write a news article saying this medicine does that, because anyone who reads it's going to say, oh, my 12-month-old has that, or my 2-year-old needs that. That's not valid, And anyone who's worked their weight in, understanding these things will read that and say, oh, no, that's for this particular group, that makes sense.
In my book, that's also unethical for a company to do that, to allow a statement out there that is based on a little bit of truth here, but it doesn't represent the greater truth of what do we know about this as far as efficacy. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's good to hear that you guys are doing that.
Yeah. Cool. Doing those sort of things, in my opinion, is going to harm more people than it is going to help.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Is there anything that you can think of that you'd like to add as far as maybe take away home for some of the families that maybe have been watching and getting to tune in and learn a little something about the immune system with regard to those things? What to look at from a company as far as what they should be eyes up, ears open a little more about? Is there anything you can think of in that realm?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, I think that not everybody is going to read a label of something and say, I know every single one of these components and all the things, that they mean. It's a lot to ask, I think, for anyone to go on and understand in depth every piece of what it is that they're reading.
For sure.
But the most important thing for me in terms of pediatrics is something safe. Generally speaking, if there is a third-party company that is validating the GMP practices of the company, those tend to be on the safer side.
Yes.
Supplements don't have to be regulated by the FDA. They don't have to be shown to be safe or effective. And so involving a third-party system is a good thing. And oftentimes they'll have various labels on them, like certified or accredited by this whatever, one thing. Other just sort of kids' pearls, I would say, would be don't be afraid of fever. Hydration is the most important thing
Yes.
for kids.
For sure.
They can go a few days without eating, and it's okay as long as they're hydrated. And yeah, those are really
Those are really good nuggets to keep in mind too. And like I said, for some that's a new information to them. So that's a little bit of a paradigm shift for them. So very happy that you're able to make it out, Dr. Basham, and share with us some of the deeper work that you've been doing, and look forward to seeing the work you'll be doing next with that company too. And keep posted, and I'll have to have you back down the road and update us on the latest and greatest.
Todd, thanks, man. It's been great.
All right, brother. All right, thanks.